Yesterday, we stopped at least in fifth period around here. We were talking about the strategies. AP doesn't ask a lot about this kind of stuff, but I do think it's important for you to understand because the same strategies that we use to win our independence would later be used against us in places like Afghanistan and before that in Vietnam. Now, the tradition or the strategy of attrition, I should say, attrition, is one where basically you kind of bleed the other side white. You bleed them troops, right? You wear down the people back home. Remember, you don't have to necessarily win the war. You just keep from losing the war, losing your army. So if you can just take out, X number of British troops every day, burn their supplies and stuff, send home bodies, eventually what that means is that they'll sue for peace, right? The Confederates tried this on the Union Army, hoping that the American people would throw Lincoln out of office. It didn't happen, and the North got a new general who actually kind of used attrition on the South, knowing that they had a lot more people. Guerrilla tactics are insurgent wars, right, where you fight not like set battles like in uniforms and everything, but you hit them, you kill as many as you can, then you get the heck out of there, right? Also, of course, this is something we were successful doing in the Revolutionary War, making alliances with with France and Spain. It was something the Confederates were never able to accomplish, right? I'm sure the Taliban got assistance from somebody somewhere, Pakistan and others were helping them. But definitely when we were fighting in Vietnam, y'all, the United States, the North Vietnam got assistance from the People's Republic of China, as well as, of course, the Soviet Union. That's what allowed them to keep fighting us. All right, now the British had a much tougher job. They might control the cities, right, with the loyalists, but taking the countryside was very difficult. Americans faced the same problem in Vietnam, the same problem in Afghanistan. You've got to have a lot of people to be able to control countryside. And the British all tried to do it like, kind of eating up the country one section after another. Deal with New England, deal with the middle colonies, finally deal with the South. And that's how this war will go, basically in the North to the middle colonies to the South. What the British did have was a large navy. And this navy, y'all, allowed them to blockade the ports, to prevent the flow of goods. The North tried the same thing on the South and was very, very successful. And you guys will see on the next, the graph coming up, how truly successful the British were with this, okay? It's really only when the French join us that we start seeing a rise in imports in this country. Now, divide and conquer is an old strategy. You get people fighting against each other, right? Use the loyalists to fight against the patriots. That way British troops aren't dying. Americans are dying, killing Americans, right? And this was something that we didn't, we kind of did a little bit of that in Vietnam with some of the Hmong that fought against the North Vietnamese and that kind of thing. I don't know to what extent we did it in Afghanistan. Not there this time either, huh? All right, sorry about that, Diego. You tried, man. You gave it the old AP try. All right. So we come to this graph, y'all, this line graph. And it's kind of interesting when you look at this because it gets me to sound a little bit like a math teacher for a brief time and talk about the y-axis and the x-axis and the intervals and stuff like I know what I'm talking about. But it is interesting because you could see something like this on an AP test as an SAQ, or you could see it as one of your documents in a DBQ, right? Now, blue is imports. They're coming into America. Blue, coming in, so they're blue. Red is going out. Now, who was our trade partner, y'all? Essentially, our only legal one, Britain, right? So pretty much everything in red here, y'all, is going to Britain. Everything blue here, of course, is obviously coming in here probably from Britain if it's legal, right? And we have records for the legal stuff. Now, the vertical axis here, y'all, is in pounds sterling, and it's in thousands. So basically, this is like 2.4 million, 2.2 million, and so forth and so on. Now, what AP could conceivably ask, and I think what I ask is, what suddenly happened here, y'all, say 1768 to 1770 or 69? So why are our imports dropping? What are Americans doing? Yeah, we're boycotting, right? We're not buying the stuff from the British. Now, was it complete? No, but it was a good 30 or 40%. It was enough, to make some impact, but it wasn't a complete boycott. Then if you remember, things seemed to get better a little bit after the Boston Massacre between 1770 and 1773. We have the so-called kind of calm period, and it goes up. But there's this weird thing here. Y'all see those little things there? What's going on there? What are those little kind of broken equal signs? Well, look back here. Okay, look at the intervals. See how I sound like a math teacher now? Look at the intervals on the y-axis. We go from 3,000 to 4,500. What had been the previous intervals? 200. So why would they do that? Why would they suddenly jump from 3,000 to 4,500?
If they show the whole axis, it wouldn't be able to show the data.
Exactly. A graph has to be useful. This thing, y'all, if they had to have 7 more intervals, it would run off the page, right? It would be actually up there by President William Henry Harrison. So the thing is, y'all, they have to cut it. I don't like when they do that, and I just kind of want you guys to be warned to look for that kind of stuff, because it really, truly, y'all, between 1770 and 1770, what? 2 or so here, y'all. I mean, our imports just skyrocketed. Obviously, we were happy to be buying British stuff. We bought more than ever. We we doubled what we had been buying just a few years before. But then, after the Boston Tea Party, y'all, 1773, we get your coercive acts going on. What happens? Drops again because of the boycott. Starts to kind of recover. So what happens here, y'all, in 1775, 76? What's going on? It's called the American Revolution. Do you think the British or anybody was letting stuff or coming in the United States? No. Or to the colonies? So as you guys can see, imports almost completely stopped during this time. The British are blockading us. They're not letting their merchants sell to their enemy. And then it continues to drop a little bit further. Now, suddenly in 1777, our imports begin to start going up again. Now, nothing like they've been before, but they go up. What happened in 1777? We found a new trade partner, a new member of our ally. Who is that? France, right? And Spain to a lesser extent. So you can guess that probably these imports are things France and to a lesser extent Spain are sending to help us. And then, of course, it goes on kind of, as the war turns to our side. In 1781, y'all, most fighting stops. Do the French need to keep sending us stuff? No. They know we've won. And so suddenly our imports drop again. Now, if you look at our exports, what we're sending out of the country, did the Brits let us take stuff out? Nope. That went down to almost nothing, y'all. If you look right here, literally nothing is leaving the United States. And you think if we can get stuff out, we can sell it and we can use it to buy weapons. The Confederacy is going to try the same thing, in the Civil War with cotton. And the Union's going to shut them down, right? And they're not going to be able to get that cotton out, and they're not going to be able to use it to buy stuff. And then finally, once the war is coming to an end, you see our exports beginning to climb back again. But man, both of them, except, maybe here, are a long ways away where they had been pre-revolution. And America is going to be struggling. I'm going to have you guys watch a video on, I put it already up on Schoology, but I'll have you guys watch it in fifth period on Monday probably, that goes over the Constitutional Convention and some of that stuff. But it begins by talking about a lot of the economic problems we were having. So this is why, graphs are so useful, but you got to have the history background to understand why these massive fluctuations, what the heck was going on. And of course, what was going on is Americans were boycotting, things were recovering, the war was going on, the British were blockading stuff coming in, and they weren't sending stuff. They weren't letting other stuff come in. They weren't letting our stuff go out. And that only begins to improve when we make an alliance with the French. But then even then, it dips as the war is kind of coming to an end. And finally, when we make the whole treaty with Paris, we can start buying British stuff again if they want to buy stuff from a former enemy. And we can buy from them as well, too.
What's the difference between the drops and imports from 1770?
What's the difference in when?
But between that first one and the 73, 75,
Okay.
From 70 to 72, it like shot up.
It does look like it does that.
They
And
both, like, weren't the dips, even though there wasn't really a dip, weren't they both just from boycotts?
well, remember, there's the Boston Massacre in 1770, right? That would be what, right here? Okay, here's the Boston Massacre. Huh?
Wasn't that 73?
No, the Boston Massacre is 70. Boston Tea Party is 1773, right? So, yeah, right here, 1770. It's kind of hard to see. You've got it right about here. So it's kind of interesting. Do we continue to trade with them after the Boston Massacre, which is in early 1770? It looks like we do. And then when this is 1774, go on up. You notice, though, even before, here's the Boston Tea Party right here. And remember, the Tea Party, y'all, is in December of 1773. So that's really, it's kind of weird because what kind of happens right after the Tea Party for a little while? It goes up. But then when the coercive acts kick in, what happens then? It just absolutely drops. Now, another thing to remember is this stuff doesn't happen overnight, right? It takes 6 weeks for stuff to get over to England, information, and 6 weeks for information to get back here. There's obviously sort of a delayed response in some cases. So it's not like, Boston Massacre, we're going to stop trading with them. Oh, the Intolerable Acts, we're going to stop trading with them. It doesn't happen quite as immediately as that. So just kind of look for that kind of lag sometimes. I don't know if I did the best job describing it, but it does really show the effectiveness of the British blockade. It also does a pretty good job showing that the boycotts were significant. It wasn't just in theory. Americans were buying less from the British. But it's kind of interesting how after some events like the Boston Massacre and other things, we actually kept buying stuff. Maybe people thought, those people in Boston, they got what's coming to them. I'm going to buy more British stuff. I don't know. All right. Now, the next thing here, and I want to make sure I have a copy of the notes so I can make sure I answer all y'all questions. What do we got for you? Yes. All righty.
When was the Constitutional Convention?
Do what?
When was the Constitutional Convention? Was that
1787. Yeah, it's the summer of 1787. Yep, they met, May or June. It was nice and hot, and it goes up.
4 years of articles.
Yep, 4 miserable years. Some people call it the critical period because, we really struggle now. Some people today, how people like to be more positive now. They push a lot about what the articles did accomplish because everybody and their mother pushes the weaknesses of the articles, the fact that you had to have a supermajority to even get a law passed, and you had to have 100% majority. All 13 states had to agree to change anything in the articles. And you guys know that the country was very weak under the articles. Each state could make its own money. They could have their own tariffs and stuff. So everybody, and they couldn't even put down a group of farmers. So everybody always disses the Articles of Confederation, like, boy, were they stupid to come up with that. But remember, these people had just had a revolution against a king that they thought was tyrannical. And they believed, a group of people could be equally tyrannical. So they intentionally make the Articles weak. It turns out to be too weak, but you kind of understand where they were coming from. And even when the new Constitution is being put out there, a lot of people are like, man, this is just too much power in the central government. We can't be doing this kind of thing. But what I was going to say is, the thing to remember about the Articles, and I'll hit this several times, the greatest positive, aside negotiating a treaty to end the war in 1783, the biggest thing that got accomplished under the Articles of Confederation was the Northwest Ordinance and the Land Ordinance, right? The Northwest Ordinance set up a system, y'all, that we still use to this day to admit a state. Let's say Puerto Rico would become a state tomorrow. Puerto Rico would come in exactly equal to the other U.S. states. So we'd be like, hey, Puerto Rico, you're the new guy. You only get one representative, sorry. But, when you grow up, we'll get you some more. They come in equally. And there's a whole process. Your population gets to a point, you submit, you become a territory where you're given a governor or whatever, then you propose to come in. We look at your constitution. If we approve your constitution, we let you come in, and that. Only one time, y'all, have we ever turned down a state to come into the country. Later, we did bring them in. Anybody know what state we said no to at first?
Texas.
No, not Texas. Although Texas, Texas, they had to sneak us in, right? But that was a different thing because we were a country, right? So yeah, I could see you guys saying Texas. That's kind of true. And as you guys will see, they had to sneak us in by doing what's called a joint resolution rather than a treaty, which required a 2/3 majority. They instead did it by just having a simple vote in the House and the Senate. And all we had to do was get 50%. No, the state that we said no to, y'all, was Utah. All right? The majority of the people in Utah, what is their religion? Even to this day, Mormon. What was a controversial practice that Mormons used to have legally and officially? Polygamy, meaning multiple wives. And so that was used as our reason to tell Utah, you can't come into this union. So Utah officially, or the Mormons officially, got rid of that. There are some that still practice it, on the side, but not within the legal and official Mormon or Latter-day Saints church. And so once they changed that, we went ahead and let Utah come in. So you can say no if there's something in their constitution that you don't like. But the other big thing about the Northwest Ordinance that you guys need to know is the fact that Jefferson made sure that slavery would not be allowed to exist in the Northwest. He wanted, and by Northwest, y'all, I don't mean like Washington and Oregon today. Remember, our country ended at the Mississippi in those days. The rest was French, right? So, and belonged to Mexico. So the thing is, what is today Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota? Those areas, y'all, might have had slavery, but Jefferson made it where you couldn't bring in slaves and you could not have slavery there. And he wanted to extend it to all new states, but he couldn't get the South to agree to that. But had he not done that, y'all, there is a strong possibility that those northern states, some of them like Illinois or Indiana, would have adopted slavery. And when the Civil War came, would they have stayed with the Union? Probably not. They might have left too. And we would have had a very, very different country, very different results in the Civil War. Had an Illinois and a Wisconsin or whatever been able to have seceded and joined the South in that war. So turned out really interesting, but they kept slavery out. All right, the next thing I want to talk about here, y'all, is the Northern Campaign. Now, we've already talked about the fighting that happened at Lexington and Concord and talked about the fighting that happened at Breeds Hill or Bunker Hill. But the next thing we tried to do, which, is way down here, was to invade Canada, something that a lot of people maybe would like to do these days. I don't know. But the thing is, y'all, we had a two-pronged attack on Canada. We had an old British officer named Montgomery. He and his men marched up across Lake Champlain, and they took Montreal. They actually took it. And then they proceeded up along the St. Lawrence to meet Benedict Arnold. Now remember, Benedict Arnold is still a good guy. In fact, he's going to be a really good guy for a long time. He left here, y'all, from Massachusetts, Massachusetts, up to Maine, and his men went down the Kennebec River. But the trouble is, y'all, it was frozen, and these guys had a rough time. Now, they used sled dogs, and they ran out of food. And so they killed their sled dogs, ate their sled dogs. Eventually, they had to boil leather and eat that, y'all. Because think about it. They're going upriver here. They aren't going downriver. They're going upriver. Finally, starving, looking awful, Benedict Arnold's men make it to Quebec. Now, what are they trying to do? What's the ethnicity of people up in Quebec and Montreal, y'all? They're French. Do the French like the English? No, right? They had just lost this war. So what do you think we're thinking by invading French Canada? They will join us. They'll be the 14th colony, eh? But it turns out didn't work that well, right? Or didn't work that way at all. If you remember the unpopular Quebec Act, which had let the French keep their religion of Catholicism, let them keep their no juries and their tradition of how they pick their representatives or whatever, they were relatively satisfied. Now, if you're a French Canadian, you're thinking, oh, maybe we should join these Americans. You should also think what? What if the Americans lose? What do you think the British are going to do to us then? Punish us big time, right? There's going to be a big payback. So the French, y'all, basically just kind of sat on the sidelines. And so the Americans had to fight British soldiers who were in Quebec. It's a terribly cold early 1776. And Benedict Arnold and Montgomery lead their men, y'all, right into battle. Almost immediately, Montgomery, who dreamed he was going to get shot and die, gets shot and dies. Bullet right through the head, if I remember right. Benedict Arnold keeps leading the men, and then he is shot in the leg. And it's a nasty wound. But he continues leading the men until finally it's clear. We're not going to take Quebec. And then guess what they had to do? Make their way all the way back again. So Arnold has attempted to take Canada A. He's failed, but through really no fault of his own, mainly through, the British taking good care of the French Canadians, eh? Want to make sure I answered all the questions I asked y'all about the invasion of Canada A. Do what? Who was wounded? Who did I just say? Benedict Arnold, yeah. And that'll be important to remember. Hello? Yes. Yes. Hermione, you're going home. All righty. Take care, you lucky dog. You're leaving candy for us? Yes, that's a no. All right. Anyway, here, y'all. So so it doesn't work. The French Canadians don't join him and all of that. Okay, finally, y'all. The ideas that inspired the revolution, okay, reflected new beliefs about politics, religion, and society that have been developing. We've talked about this a lot, y'all, but I think it's really, really important that you guys get this. And of course, a lot of it has to do with the impact of the Enlightenment, I apologize for so much being crammed on a single slide. I normally try not to do that. Now, one of the things, if you guys are asked about how revolutionary was the revolution, did it really change much, right? Well, you could say already, well, the Northwest Ordinance banned slavery in the new northern states and that kind of stuff. But something also else that shows that we were changing and things were being modified here was we ended primogeniture. Now, I'll talk about that at another time as well, too. What does that primogeniture mean? Eldest son inherits everything. And one thing Americans tried to do just above that, y'all, is, and I know it's not perfect, and you and I know if my or your last name were Gates, or if our last name were Musk or Bezos, you and I would probably have a little bit different life right now, wouldn't we? And our kids would have a very different life, right? But the idea still is, it shouldn't be hereditary privilege just because you're a sir or a lord or a lady or something like that. We get rid of hereditary privilege in that. In fact, unless you're a rapper, you cannot have like sir or whatever as part of your name. Like when I was younger, there was Sir Mix-a-Lot, but my favorite was Sirloin. Sirloin was pretty awesome. Anyway, but the thing is, it's strictly banned in our Constitution. If you're an American, yeah, they can give you, the Queen or now King can knight you, but you can't really be known as, Sir Bob over here or something like that, Sir Robert. So we got rid of that, and we really valued you making it, your talent over just what your parents' last name or whatever is. Now, primogeniture was a way, y'all, to keep giant estates intact, gigantic, areas, and to keep the rich super rich. Now, people tended to have lots of kids back then. Not only did you have heirs, you had spares, and probably spares to the spares, right? So you might have 4, 5, or even 6 sons. What happens if you divide your property, say, equally among all 6 sons? It loses value. It's going to get smaller and smaller. And let's say those 6 sons have an average of 5 kids each. 5 sons. What happens then? It gets divided further and further. And eventually it's like, son, when I die, this square is going to be yours, right? It's not much. And so the idea was, it's sad, but the firstborn son, and notice we're not mentioning daughters here because daughters married off. You didn't, you maybe gave them something to get the husband to marry him, right? You guys know about dowries, right?
Big problem.
Yeah. The dowry was a way like, my daughter, she's beautiful and she's going to come with a lot of land, okay, if you marry her. So, and we still have a residue of that today. When you get married, ladies, who pays for the wedding? Yeah, the wife's family, particularly the wife's, the wife's dad, the girl's dad is supposed to pay for the wedding, right? Now, that's a tradition, and it kind of goes back to the old dowry system. So girls weren't eligible to get anything, y'all, except what they were going to have for their dowry, which went to their husband. Men, on the other hand, if you weren't the firstborn son, and it could get silly, y'all. If you were a twin and you were born a few minutes ahead of the other guy, you get it. The other guy, so much, right? Not so much, right? So by law, the firstborn son got everything. Well, this causes wealth to accumulate and stay in one hand. We made that illegal in a lot of states. We made you have to spread the wealth among your family so that those giant wealthy estates wouldn't accumulate. Doesn't mean we don't have rich people. You got Rockefellers and Vanderbilts and some of those families, y'all, that have a lot of money, but they would have even more if they could just leave it to one son and keep passing it down, right? Imagine Bill Gates, firstborn son got everything, and then his firstborn son would get everything. So we got rid of that. Now, Americans also had this belief, y'all, that, I use the old line, but that we were certainly, at least the Northern Americans believed we were kind of on a mission from God, that we had a covenant with God. God had blessed us in hopes that we would, with liberty, he blessed us with liberty with hopes that we would be an example to the world, this idea of American exceptionalism. Now, you may agree, you may disagree. Are we an exceptional nation in that sense? Is it our job to be an example and to help others around the world? You may disagree or whatever. Doesn't matter how you feel, it's how they felt. And a lot of them believed and acted on this idea that we had a special mission here and we were blessed with liberty. One of my favorite quotes of Thomas Paine is that America, he said, should be an asylum for mankind. He said liberty has been basically, outlawed around the world and has to take refuge over here. Some of his writing, y'all, is just absolutely unbelievable. So here we come to T-Paine, Thomas Paine. There you see a picture of him, right? And, of course, AP is going to make you guys learn a lot about both the Declaration and Common Sense. Now, this is what Common Sense looked like, a copy there. This is my copy. I wish it were an original because the originals are worth many, many millions of dollars. I was out in Lost Wages one time, Las Vegas, and I saw one of these, an original for sale. So you notice, is it really a book, right? It's a pamphlet. And I think in this particular typeset, which is a pretty big font, it's only 79 pages. So it's easily readable. Y'all want to like me to assign y'all to read it or anything? Okay. I could give you some excerpts, but we will read a few little excerpts, but it is powerful. Now, it's not written for like super intellectuals. Remember, he's writing this for the average person, the average colonist, and they could read. So it's very inflamed, right? It's a pretty simple vocabulary. He's got to reach a lot of people. Now, what does he say is common sense? It's common sense to break away from this corrupt monarch. And, he uses, common sense. He talks about nowhere in the solar system, right, is there a larger body orbiting a smaller body, right? And he said, and yet this whole continent of North America is essentially being made to orbit a single little island. He talks a lot, too, about the craziness of having a hereditary monarch. Do some monarchs sometimes have less than brilliant kids? Yeah. So you pass them by? No, you're stuck with them. All right? And so he just kind of goes on like, what a crazy system of government. And one thing after another, and people who read it like, yeah, man, we're pretty stupid for keeping the system. Let's get away from those morons, right? And so, like I said, it was a pamphlet. People would read it, pass it on to somebody else. They even did early bootlegs, y'all. Like people pirated it and copied it. Now, it didn't have his name on it originally, but later people figure out who it was. So he didn't really make a whole lot of money off of it, if any at all. But that's Thomas Paine in there. So a little island should not rule a large continent. Makes no common sense. The idea of hereditary monarchy makes no sense. And, a handful of people, y'all, I'm guessing maybe 10%, 5% of Americans would have favored independence when this book came out in guess what year? 1776. But after reading it, probably 30, 40% or more of Americans now favored independence. Along with Uncle Tom's Cabin, y'all, I think this is probably the most important book in American history. It changed everything. Okay? Now, we got a little video here that we'll talk about him.
The sun never shined on a cause of greater worth. 'Tis not the concern of a day, a year, or an age. Posterity will be affected, even to the end of time.
The writer of those words was an Englishman who had immigrated to the New World only a few months before the clash at Lexington and Concord. He was self-educated and penniless. At age 38, Thomas Paine had been a tutor, tobacconist, grocer, and corset maker, and he had failed at everything except troublemaking.
Well, except failing. He was very successful at failing.
Enjoyed taking on everyone as a kind of 18th century Socrates. He was in the marketplace arguing with everybody. He became a tax collector, was fired from his job when he was caught handing out petitions to members of parliament asking for higher pay for the tax collectors.
In London, Paine's appeals on behalf of underpaid civil servants caught the attention of Benjamin Franklin, who was there as an agent for several colonies. After meeting Paine, Franklin recommended him as an ingenious, worthy young man and sponsored his immigration to America. Once in Philadelphia, Paine began to write a pamphlet promoting the radical idea of American independence. Thomas Paine had suffered all his life under England's class system, and he spared no venom in his writing.
But
In January of 1776, after virtually every typesetter in Philadelphia had refused to touch his treasonous work, a rebel printer finally agreed to publish it. Common Sense was its down-to-earth title. In its 47 pages, Paine attacked the notion that England's king should be seen as a parent to the American colonists. He set out to dethrone the sacred institution of monarchy.
This is the most prosperous invention the devil ever set on foot for the promotion of idolatry. In England, a king hath little more to do than make wars and give away places. A pretty business indeed for a man to be allowed 800,000 a year for, and worshipped into the bargain.
Paine, I think, virtually destroys the notion of monarchy as a form of government, which is really surprising because no one had been attacking monarchy in the colonies. It wasn't a political issue. And his arguments seemed to be so persuasive that virtually no colonist, with the exception of the Tories, ever advocated monarchical rule again.
When it came out, Common Sense sold 120,000 copies in the first 3 months. And over the course of several years, it sold 500,000 copies. This was the equivalent, or almost the equivalent, of the Bible sales in colonial America. It was quite phenomenal.
Common Sense was read aloud from street corners and pulpits, in taverns, parlors, and schools. The brilliant pamphlet was published anonymously. People speculated it had been written by Samuel Adams, John Adams, or even Benjamin Franklin. A Connecticut man wrote an open letter to the unnamed author.
You have declared the sentiments of millions. We were blind, but on reading these enlightening words, the scales have fallen from our eyes.
Tom Paine was saying in this pamphlet what a lot of people were now thinking but had hardly dared to say out loud. In other words, that the colonies were at war with England.